private sector. Arising from the initiative, I gave examples from my personal interaction with such categories of people during the inspection of the housing sites in Taraba, Gombe, Ekiti, and other states across the country in early 2017, during which the resounding narratives from the plumbers, welders, bricklayers, food vendors was, "Thank you for us because we are back to work. Thank Buhari for us because we are back to work," unquote. I recall then from my visit to the Oyo State site, where I met a couple from Lagos working at the site with the husband as a mason and bricklayer, while the wife sold food to workers. I also spoke then about plans to include members of the informal sector in the housing program through the expansion and registration of more cooperatives and assisting people to key into the program, because within the financing sector, it had become important to ensure that those who have legitimate assets and income but were not in formal recorded form could still be assisted from ownership. I also acknowledge that there was a challenge in the nation's housing sector, but insisted that the way to solve it was not to be intimidated by the size, but to focus on how to overcome it bit by bit, urging that the size of the problem should not dampen the enthusiasm to seek for solutions. Of course, I also disagreed with the estimated size of the nation's housing deficit because it lacked any empirical basis. If we fast forward to the present and this 2021 conference, holding even as our country, as indeed the entire world, is still grappling with the socio-economic consequences of the COVID-19 pandemic, I have nothing but progress to report about how the built industry, operatives, professionals, and other stakeholders have contributed to increasing the stock of affordable and accessible home ownership in the pre- and post-COVID era. Indeed, housing delivery in COVID-19 era and beyond, the strategies for affordability and accessibility was the theme at the 9th edition of the National Council meeting on lands, housing, and urban development, which held in Jos, Plateau State, and most of the recommendations at that meeting remain apt for the gathering here today. But permit me to dwell on the progress report pertaining to my submissions at the 2017 conference. As part of the President Muhammadu Buhari's developmental agenda of addressing housing needs in Nigeria, the federal government inaugurated a pragmatic national housing program, NHP, for the construction of acceptable and affordable houses nationwide. The first phase of the program commenced in the 2016 financial year in 34 states and FCT. The reason why we have not commenced in 2 states, Lagos and Rivers, was that we couldn't get land from the state at that time. But as I'm talking to you now, effort is being made to build in these 2 states. Further to the above, the ministry is promoting local content in line with the Executive Order 3 and 5. The use of available local building materials in the NHP has stimulated the economy through the production and use of these materials. The overall economic value chain arising from the housing construction activities is mostly beneficial to the Nigerian youth who are directly involved in the physical production of the houses. The philosophy behind the NHP is the provision of pilot housing scheme that is affordable, accessible, and acceptable as contained in the National Housing Policy. The approach to the design and use of materials takes cognizance of the cultural and environmental considerations of the regions, thereby responding to the tenets of the Building Energy and Efficiency Code being championed by the ministry. A total of 1,021 building contractors have been engaged under Phase 1 and 2 of the program since the inception in 2016, and 13,680 and 41,040 direct and indirect jobs have been generated. During this period, the ministry has undertaken the construction of 4,694 housing units, and out of which 2,249 units have been completed in 34 states and FCT, with a total of 41 sites spread over 34 states and FCT. This does not include other initiatives by the ministry, such as housing development through public-private partnership, PPP initiatives, and site and service schemes across the states. It also does not include houses delivered by the Federal Housing Authority, FHA, and the Federal Mortgage Bank of Nigeria, FMBN, both of who are parastatals of the ministry engaged in housing delivery and finance. A lot has also happened with regards to the policy on cooperatives, which was in its embryonic stage in 2017, and this was also reported at the council meeting as follows. Quote, I am in a position to update council that the Federal Mortgage Bank of Nigeria, FMBN, has been the driver of the initiative at Federal Government of Nigeria level, and they have 86 cooperatives engaged in projects. 35,784,000,000 cumulatively approved. 10.95 billion cumulatively disbursed. 57 cooperative housing development loans under processing as at January 2021. The potential for accessibility and affordability is that 1. Cooperative members can choose what they want and therefore design and build to fit their own individual and group budget. 2. Cooperatives can leverage their members to get group discount for purchase of building materials and the engagement of contractors to build. Because state governments control much more land, the use of the land as a tool to enable cooperatives within their states to build can be very impactful in changing the affordability and accessibility paradigms in the COVID-19 era and beyond. As underscored during the council meeting, the federal government is fully aware that housing challenges are prevalent in urban centers, which should be understood as a symptom of urbanization. The rural areas face less challenges, as evidenced by a number of empty houses available for occupation. Urbanization creates excess demand, which in turn creates economic problems of demand and supply that is translated into price hike and scarcity. This ultimately impacts on affordability and accessibility of houses. It is evident that most houses available for sale or rent belong mostly to individuals and private companies compared to those the states or federal government have available. Therefore, many of the tenants who owe rent, who face eviction, or who seek to rent or buy property due to the pandemic are dealing with private citizens or companies, and less so with government agencies. Consequently, my recommendation for improving access and affordability in the COVID-19 era and beyond, as presented at the council meeting, and which is still apt for this gathering, is for private companies and individuals to give back some of what they control to citizens in the way the federal government of Nigeria has given back to citizens some of what it controls. For example, in cases where rent of businesses or individuals are due for renewal, the private landlords can give back by accepting monthly, quarterly, or half-yearly rent instead of 1 year, 2 or 3 years rent in advance. The risk of default can be secured by bank guarantees or insurance bonds provided by the tenant or the employer in exchange for a direct debit mandate for the employer for the deduction of his rent from his salary to pay the landlord. Where rent has fallen into arrears, it is possible to emulate what federal government of Nigeria did through the CBN to reschedule payment on loans by rescheduling the payment for the tenant to more affordable terms instead of adopting eviction. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, notably, all of these are matters of voluntary action by property owners and a matter of conscience. And perhaps the question to ask is whether we can do for ourselves or give to one another what we ask government to do for us or give to us. Beyond voluntary action, there is state intervention which can facilitate access and affordability. Hence, the recommendation to the Council to consider intervention by way of recommending a legislation that limits how much advance rent can be demanded or paid for renting accommodation. This is a fertile and yet largely untapped ground for state legislators to connect with their constituents by making legislation that regulate the demand for prohibitive advance rent payments in areas of high density where the bulk of the people live. This because rent is not a federal matter. I venture to predict that a legislator or groups of legislators who take action in this regard will walk into the warm embrace of their constituents at the appropriate time for having delivered through representation. The sanction for non-compliance is that this will be a self-enforcing legislation in that the state apparatus, such as the courts, will not help any party to such a contract get relief, as it will be a patently illegal contract. This has been tried in other jurisdictions within and outside Nigeria, and it has helped to improve accessibility and affordability. Many empty properties in our urban centers remain inaccessible or unaffordable because of some of the factors associated with advance rent, and they can be unlocked if we act. On this note, I enjoin you all to have a fruitful deliberation which hopefully will advance the cause of affordable housing and further stimulate the housing economy nationwide. I thank you all for your attention.